anxiously about as it went, as if it had lost something. She heard it muttering to itself, "The Duchess, the Duchess! Oh, my dear paws! Oh, my fur and whisk! Get me executed, for sure as ferrets are ferrets! Which can I have? Where can I wonder?" Alice guessed in a moment that it was looking for the fan and the pair of white. She very good-naturedly began hunting about for them, but they were nowhere to be seen. Things seemed to have changed since her swim in the pool, and the great hall with the glass table and the little completely. Very soon the rabbit noticed Alice as she went and called out to her in an angry voice, "Why, Mary Ann, what are you doing out here? Run and fetch me a pair of gloves and a fan. Quick now!" And Alice was so that she ran off at once in the distance the direction it pointed to explain the mistake that it had made. "He took me for his housemaid," she ran. "How surprised he'll be when he finds out who I am! But I'd better take fan and gloves, that is, if I can find them." As she said this, she saw a neat little house, on the door of which was a bright brass plate with W. Rabbit engraved upon it. She went in without knocking and hurried upstairs, and she should meet the real Mary Ann, and she turned out and be turned out of the house and found the fan and gloves. "How queer it seems," Alice said to herself, to be going messages for a rabbit. "I suppose Dinah will be sending messages next." And she began fancying the sort of thing that would happen. "Come here directly and get ready for your walk. Come in a moment, nurse, but I've got to wait till Dinah comes back and see that the mouse doesn't get out. Only I don't think that they'd let Dinah stop in the house if it began ordering people about like that." Time she found her way into a tidy little room with a table in the window, and on it a fan and 2 or 3 pairs of tiny white kid gloves. She took up a pair of the gloves and was just going to leave the room when her eyes fell on a bottle that stood near the looking-glass. There was no label this time with the words. Nevertheless, she uncorked it and put it to her lips. "I know something interesting," she said to herself, "whenever I eat or drink anything, so I'll just see how it does. I do hope it'll make me grow large again, for I really am quite tired of such a tiny little thing." It did so indeed, and much sooner than she had expected. She had drunk half the bottle. She found her head pressing against the ceiling, and had to stop to save her neck from being broken. She hastily put down the bottle, saying to herself, "That's quite enough, it can't grow any more." And as it did, "I can't get out of the door. I hadn't drunk quite so much." Alas, it was too late to wish that. She went growing, and very soon had to kneel down on the floor. In another, there was not even room for this, and she tried the effect of lying down, elbow against the door and the other arm curled around her head. Still, she went on as a last resource. She put one arm out of the window and one foot up, and she said to herself, "Now I can do no more, whatever happens. What will become of me?" Luckily for Alice, the little magic bottle had now had its full effect, and she grew. Still, it was very uncomfortable, and as there seemed to be no sort of chance ever getting out of the room again, no wonder she felt unhappy. It was much pleasanter at home, thought poor Alice, when one wasn't always growing larger and being ordered about by mice and rabbits. "I almost wish I hadn't a rabbit hole, and yet, it's rather curious, this sort of life. What can have happened to me? When I used to read fairy tales, I fancied they never happened, and now here I am in the middle of one. There ought to be a book written that there ought. And when I grow up, I'll write one. But grown up now," she added in a sorrowful tone. "At least there's no up any more here." "But then," thought Alice, "shall I never be than I am now? That'll be a comfort one way. Never to be an old woman, but then always lessons to learn. Oh, I shouldn't like that." "Oh, you foolish Alice," she answered. "How can you learn lessons in here? Why, there's hardly room for you, and no room at all for books." And so she went on taking first one side and then the other, a conversation of it all together. But after a few minutes she heard a voice outside and Marianne! Marianne! Said the voice. Fetch me my gloves this minute. Then came a little pattering of feet on the stairs, and Alice knew it was the rabbit look for her, and she trembled till she shook the house, quite forgetting that she was 1,000 times as large as the rabbit, and had no reason to be afraid of it. The rabbit came up to the door and tried to open it, but as the door opened inwards and Alice pressed hard against it, that attempt proved a failure. Alice heard it say, "Then I'll go round and get in at that window." That Eunice thought, and after waiting till she fancied she heard the rabbit just under the window, she spread out her hand and made to snatch at the air. She did not get up. She heard a little squeak and a fall, and a crash of broken glass, for that it was just possible it had fallen into a cucumber frame, or something of the sort. Came an angry voice, the rabbit's. "Pat! Pat! Where are you?" And in a voice she had said, "Sure then, I'm here, digging for apples, your honor." "Digging for apples, indeed. Here, come and help me out of this." Sounds of more broken glass. "Pat, what's that in the window?" "Sure, it's an arm, your honor." He pronounced it arm. "An arm, you goose, you who never saw one that's arm, you goose. Who ever saw one that size? Why, it fills the whole window." "Sure it does, but it's an arm for all that." "Well, it's got no business there at any rate. Go and take." There was a long silence after this, and Alice could only hear whispers now and then, just, "Sure I don't like it, your honor, at all, at all." "Do as I tell you, you." At last she spread out her hand again and made another snatch in the air. This time 2 little shrieks, and more sounds of broken glass. What a number of cucumber frames, thought Alice. I wonder what they'll do next. As for pulling me out of the window, if they could, I'm sure I don't want to stay here any longer. She waited time without hearing anything more. At last came a rumbling of little cartwheels from a good many voices, all talking together. She made out the other ladder. "Why, I hadn't to bring it but once. Bill's got the other. Here, lad. Here, put 'em up at this corner. No, tie 'em together first. Don't reach half high yet enough." "Oh, they'll be enough. Don't be particular. Here, Bill, catch hold of this rope. There, mind that loose slate. Oh, it's coming down. Heads below." A loud crash did that. It was Bill, I fancy. "Who's to go down the chimney?" "Nay, I shan't." "That I won't, then." "Bill's got to go down there." "Here, Bill, the master says you've got to." "Oh, so Bill's got to come down the chimney, has he?" said Alice to herself. "Seemed to put everything upon Bill. I wouldn't be in Bill's place for a good deal. This far to be sure, but I think I can kick a little." She drew her foot as on the chimney as she could, and waited until she heard a little animal. She couldn't guess what sort it was, and scrambling about in the chimney close above her, then saying to herself, "This," she gave one sharp kick, and waited to see what would happen next. The first thing, general chorus of "There goes Bill!" Then the rabbit's voice alone, "Catch him! You by the—" Then silence, and then another confusion of voices. "Hold up his head! Brandy now, don't—" "How was that, old fellow? What happened to you? Tell us all about it." Little feeble squeaking voice. "That's Bill," thought Alice. "Well, I hardly know no more, thank ye. I better now. But I'm a deal too flustered to tell you. Always something comes up at me like a jack-in-the-box, and up I goes like a sky—" "So you did, old fellow," said the others. "We must burn the house down," said the rat, and Alice called out as loud as she could, "If you do, I'll set dynamite at you." Silence, dead instantly, and Alice thought to herself, "I'll do next. If they have any sense, they'll take the roof off." After a moment, began moving about again, and Alice heard the rabbit saying, "A barrowful will do to begin with." A barrowful of what? thought Alice, but she had not long to. The next moment a shower of little pebbles came rattling in at the window, and some of them. "I'll put a stop to this," she said to herself, and shouted out, "You'd better not do that." It produced another dead silence. Alice noticed with some surprise that the turning into little cakes as they lay on the floor, and a bright idea came into her head. These cakes, she thought, I'm sure to make some change in my size, and as it can't be larger, it must make me smaller, I suppose. So she swallowed one of them, was delighted to find that she began shrinking directly. As soon as she was small enough to soar, she ran out of the house and found quite a crowd of little animals waiting outside. The poor little lizard, Bill, who was in the middle of being held up by two who were giving it something out of a bottle. They all made a rush at Alice, but she ran off as hard as she could and soon found herself safe in a thick wood. "First thing I've got to do," said Alice to herself as she wandered about in the wood, "is my right size again, and the second thing is to find my way into that lovely garden. Will be the best plan." It sounded an excellent plan, no doubt, and very simply arranged. The only difficulty was that she had not the smallest idea how to doing it. And while she was peering about anxiously among the trees, a little just over her head made her look up in a great hurry. Puppy was looking down at her with the large round eyes and feebly stretching out, trying to touch her. "Poor little thing," said Alice in a coaxing tone, and she tried to it, but she was terribly frightened all the time at the thought that it might be Hunger case. It would be very likely to eat her all her coaxing. Hardly knowing what she did, she picked up a stick and held it out to the puppy, whereupon the puppy jumped up into the air all at once with a yelp of delight and rushed at the stick and made believe to worry at it. Then Alice dodged behind a great thistle to keep herself from being run over, and the moment on the other side, the puppy made another rush at the stick, head over heel in its hurry to get hold of it. Then Alice, thinking it was a game of play with a cart horse, and expecting every moment to be trampled upon under its feet, ran round the thistle again, began a series of short charges at the stick, running a very little way toward it time, and a long way back, and barking hoarsely all the while, till it lay down a good ways off, panting with its tongue hanging out of its mouth, and its great eyes. This seemed to Alice a good opportunity for making her escape, so she set off at once and was quite tired and out of breath until the puppy's bark sounded quite faint. And yet what a dear little puppy it was, said Alice as she leaned against a buttercup and fanned herself with one of the leaves. "I should have liked teaching it tricks very, very much if only I'd been the right size to do it. Oh dear, I've forgotten what I've got to throw up again. Let me see. How is it to be? I suppose I ought to eat or drink something or other, but the great question is what?" There certainly was what. Alice looked all round her at the flowers and the blades of grass, and did not see anything that looked like the right thing to eat or drink under the circumstances. A large mushroom growing near her, but about the same height as herself, and looked under it, and on both sides of it, and behind it, it occurred to her that she might see what was on the top of it. She stretched herself up on her tiptoes and peeped over the mushroom, and her eyes immediately met those of a large blue caterpillar that was sitting with its arms folded, quietly smoking a long hookah, and taking not notice of her or of anything else. Chapter 5. Advice from The caterpillar and Alice noticed each other for some time in silence. At last the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and addressed with sleepy voice. "Who are you?" said the caterpillar. This was not an encouraging opening for conversation. Alice replied rather, I hardly know, sir, just at present. At least I know this when I got up this morning, but I think I must have changed several times since then." "What do you mean by that?" said the caterpillar sternly. "Explain yourself." "I explain myself, I'm afraid, sir," said Alice, "because I'm not myself, you see." "I," said the caterpillar. "I'm afraid I can't put it more clearly," Alice replied, very polite. "I can't understand it myself to begin with. and being so many different sizes is confusing." "It isn't," said the caterpillar. "Well, perhaps you haven't yet," said Alice, "but when you have to turn into a chrysalis, you will someday, you know that, into a butterfly, I should think you'll feel it a little queer, wouldn't you?" "Not a bit," said. "Well, perhaps your feelings may be different," said Alice. "All I know is, it would feel very queer to me." "You," said the caterpillar contemptuously. "You!" Which brought them back again to the beginning of the conversation. Well irritated at the caterpillar's making such very short remarks, and she said very gravely, "I think you ought to tell me who you are first." The caterpillar. Here was another puzzling question, and as Alice could not think of a reason, and as the caterpillar seemed to be in a very unpleasant state of mind, she turned. "Come back," the caterpillar called after her. "I've something important to say." This sounded promising, certainly. Alice turned and came back again. "Keep yours," said the caterpillar. "Is that all?" said Alice, swallowing down her anger. "No," said the caterpillar. Alice thought she might as well wait as she was to do, and perhaps, after all, it might tell her something worth learning. For some minutes without speaking, but at last it unfolded its arms, took the hookah out of its mouth, and said, "So you think you're changed, do you?" "I'm afraid I am, sir," said Alice. "I can't remember things as I used, and I don't keep for 10 minutes longer." "Can't remember what things?" said the caterpillar. "How doth the little busy bee, but it all came out different," Alice replied, in a very melancholy. "Repeat, 'You are old, Father William,'" said the caterpillar. Her arms and began. "You are old, Father William," the young man said, "and your hair is white, and yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age it is right?" "Youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared it might injure the brain, but now sure I have none, why I do it again and again." "You are old," said the youth before, "and have grown most uncommonly fat, yet you turned a backward somersault in. What is the reason of that?" "In my youth," said the sage, as he shook his, "I kept all my limbs very supple. By the time of this ointment, one shall allow me to sell you a couple." "You are old," said the youth, "and your jaws are too tougher than suet. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and with a bone. Pray, how did you manage to do it?" "In my youth," said the father, "I shook to the law, and argued each case with my wife, and the muscular strength which jaw has lasted the rest of my life." "You are old," said the youth. "One would hardly suppose that your eye was as steady as ever. Yet you balanced an eel nose. What made you so awfully clever?" "I have ambitions, and that is enough," said the father. "Don't give yourself airs. You can listen all day to such stuff. Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs." "That is it," said the caterpillar. "Not quite right, I'm afraid," said Alice timidly. Some of the altered. "It is wrong from beginning to end," said the caterpillar